You can imagine a little.
Mike, what are you doing?
Well, Jenny has asked me to take some pictures here.
Well, should I take my hat off?
Unless you want him in the picture.
Pictures of what?
She wants, I've heard talking about a video talking about your father.
Oh, is my hair combed now?
No, not totally. Yeah, that's better.
Well, you know, there's two stories. That Dad was born once in Beezer, and I mean, he was only born once, but I mean, he was born in Beezer or he was born in Cardston. Now, his oldest brother's name was Jasper Jason, and he died moving from Beezer to McGrath, so I don't know. Now, he was 11 years old, and he was going to drive the wagon from Beezer to McGrath, but he got hit in the head. Everyone says that a little idiot boy hit him with a rock. They must have really hit him because it killed him. It took him a while to die. But
How old was he?
And I don't really know if, see, Dad was one of the younger children. He was the oldest, and he died when he was 11. That's when they were moving out of Beezer. So I don't think Dad was born in Beezer. He said, as I recall, he was born in Cardston. So the records show that he was born in Beezer or that he was born in Cardston. But I really think he was born in Cardston.
Well, if you get out your pedigree chart, it should say where he was born.
I know, but sometimes those things are wrong. But Dad had a really strong mother and father. I know they grew up in an era when the church was strong but didn't have all the necessary restrictions. I know that the word of wisdom wasn't all that. Of course, I don't know that any of them broke the word of wisdom, but the word of wisdom wasn't all that strong.
Also, you could start out by saying that they were sent up to colonize southern Alberta by Brigham Young.
Yeah.
Who was?
Well, Brigham Young sent a wagon train to Cache County.
In Utah. That's by Logan.
And they moved into there and crossed the river and built a little town called Franklin. You've been to Franklin, haven't you? Yeah. Okay, now the story says that 2 years after they moved in, the Army Corps of Engineers came in and told them that they were, now this was Dad's father, not Dad, told them that it was Dad's grandfather.
His grandfather?
William Henry Head, his dad's grandfather. Now, didn't we go down there and look at that Battle Creek from the top of that hill?
Yes, we did.
Anyway, they said that the Army Corps of Engineers came in 17 years later and told them after this many years that they had settled on the Idaho side of the river. And I'd always heard that it came in 2 years later. But Dad's father was born.
Dad's father's name?
Jasper Jason Head. He was the second boy baby born in the first town in Idaho. He was the second boy baby born. There was a girl and a boy born before he was in Franklin, Idaho, but he was the second.
And that's Nephi Lawrence's father?
Yeah, Jasper Jason Head. And then Jasper Jason Head was sent north by Brigham Young or whoever it was to colonize southern Alberta. So that's why Dad got up there. But they settled in McGrath. Have you been to that place in McGrath where you drive along the side of the hill and look down into this little valley? You know, we need to do that. We need to go back up there.
And they started that mercantile store, didn't they?
Yeah, they started the mercantile store.
Jasper Jason?
Jasper Jason and Harker, I can't remember. Anyway, Jasper Jason was
in
farmer and a rancher. What?
In McGrath or Cardston?
McGrath. Jasper Jason was a rancher and a farmer, but he went in business with this Harper, and they built that trading post in McGrath. And I think Jason was McGrath's first overseer, or whatever it was they called the mayor in those days. Mike, are you going to take this whole thing?
I'm just obeying what Jenny asked me to do.
All right.
I'm not too sure how much space I have on
Yeah,
here.
you don't have that much space. Well, when he was 20 years old, the war had been going, I think, for about 4 years, the First World War. It was called the Great War, and then they had the Second World War 20 years later, and it was also called the Great War, and the first one was World War I. Dad was, I think, that Book of Mormon that his mother gave him.
When your dad was 20 years old?
Yeah, he went to England. He joined the Royal Air Force and went to England to train, and then went over to France and Belgium
To fly.
to fly. But he got there just as the war was ending, and so he never did fly combat. And when I grew up, there was a common term called hedge hopping. Now, I thought it was a common term because I'd heard that expression a number of times, but hedge hopping was simply flying cross country. They used to have races. After the war was over, they didn't know what to do. They were just kind of wearing down. Airdromes, that's what we used to call them, not airfield, but airdromes used to have what we called landing fields. Landing field was a common term. The landing field was called a landing field because there weren't any runways. It was just a big field, and they'd have a windsock up above this field, and the planes would come in and land in whichever way the windsock said to land.
Oh.
So they wouldn't land in one direction all the time. Whichever way the windsock was blowing, they would land upwind, so they'd always be coming upwind. And those planes were so light, they were made out of canvas and sticks practically. They were so light that the big motor sitting in front that turned the propeller was so heavy that they would come down. If they had a hard landing, they'd hit that and hit a hole and in the landing field, and the plane would tip over. And I'm sure that's what happened. That picture you've got there, I'm sure that was just Dad had about 5 landing accidents.
But he's never hurt.
But he never was hurt. That's because they had seatbelts, of course, and shoulder straps. But
would you let him take that hat you've got in the other room? With your dad?
yeah, you can take that hat if you want,
Really?
and you can also take the commission he got from King George V. You can take that, both of them with you. Yeah, might as well.
How old was he in this picture?
20, I think. Maybe 21 by then, I don't know. 20, 21. But they used to have races in France. They'd have a race. They'd take off from their airdrome. Airdrome. Did you ever hear that word before? A-E-R-D-R-O-M-E. Airdrome.
That's airplane?
Airdrome was the landing field. It was the airport. It was like the airport. They'd take off from the airdrome, and they would fly cross country across France. And of course, France still has a lot of hedges, hedgerows. And if you took off and you tried to gain altitude, you would slow down. So you stayed just as low as you possibly could, missing the cows and things, and they would come to these hedges and they'd raise up enough to hop over the hedge, so they called them hedge hopping. So they go hedge hopping, they'd go from wherever their airdrome was to a distant town in France where they had a tower or a lighthouse or a church or something. They would go to that town and they'd circle around and come back, and who could get around that tower or whatever it was they circled and come back first won. And Dad said the pilots who had been in war, who'd flown their planes in the war, were the most daring and the most tough and the most brave. And if there was just a little gap between trees, they would head for it, and the younger pilots would get chicken and they'd pull up. And the seasoned fighter pilots would stay right in that, and they'd go for that, and knew that they could bluff the other guy out. So they always won. Dad said he never won at one of those hedge hopping races if he flew with a pilot that had been.
That was his helmet.
That was
This was his helmet.
in World War One.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Think of that.
That's more than 100 years old, Jimmy.
Wow.
You can take that hanger out if you want.
That was just because I hung it up that way.
What is this little round thing for?
That's what they. Oh, I don't know what it was. I have no idea.
Or some of those strings down there go through it.
Through this? I don't know.
Anyway, he's also got his.
And here's holes that go all the way through to the ear.
Yeah.
Probably so they
They
could.
probably had a radio in there. I don't know what kind of radios they had,
Huh.
but I know that the radios they didn't use them like they do now. Anyway, but they flew a lot of these hedge hopping races, and they'd land and come down, and that's why they had so many accidents, because they're always taking off and landing. Anyway, I don't know anything more about it. We've got pictures of him in Belgium too. He was in France and Belgium both after the war.
You have pictures of him in Belgium?
Somewhere. Yeah.
But you ought to tell him not just about his flying, but his growing up.
I don't know anything about his growing up.
Well, you know, he grew up in McGrath. You know that they were sent up there.
Yeah,
He had all those brothers and sisters that he held around with, I guess.
yeah.
He was sent up there. He was born in Canada.
He was born in Canada.
Jasper Jason was sent up.
Yeah. William Henry had, you know, there's a story about him and the army that came up to kill the Indians. William Henry had was his.
Oh, in Preston?
Yeah. William Henry had was Dad's great grandfather. And
He was a great grandfather.
yeah, no, he was a grandfather. William Henry had was Jasper Jason's father, so he'd been Dad's grandfather, and then Jasper Jason was the father. Jasper Jason used to carry a pistol, and there's a story once they were had their farm in, I don't know where, if it was in Beezer then or where. He had 2 or 3 ranches and he had 2 or 3 farms. He kept firewood or kept wood and had a sawmill too at one time. But, Jasper Jason had worked on the Canadian Pacific Railroad. Mary Hadlin Thomas, they lived on the railroad. They lived in
A car?
one of the cars, yeah. They had living quarters in there. So they lived in there, and they went along. They went as far east, I think, as Regina, Saskatchewan. And Jasper Jason Head was in charge of building the grade for the railroad. The railroad tracks ran on, and so Dad was living on this in the railroad car with his mother, Mary Hadlin Thomas, and she cooked for the workers. And one time she left to go to Lethbridge, and Dad said he was sliding down some ties or something, and he got a big sliver in his bottom, and it hurt like crazy, and he lit out running for his mother, Mary Hadlin Thomas. And on the way there, he realized that she had gone to Lethbridge and she wasn't there. And he said he remembers just sitting right down there on the railroad track and crying because Mama wasn't there and he had such a terrible pain in his body. And he says his dad came along with a pocket knife and took it out. That's one of the stories I remember that. But that was one of the things they did growing up that I knew about in his childhood. So he was just a little boy then.
So when he was a little boy, he lived on the railroad with his
Yeah.
mom and dad.
Yeah.
What about,
Canadian Pacific.
and he had a brother named Jasper Jason?
His oldest brother was named, they called him Jassy. And Jassy, when they lived in Beezer, they were told to go down to McGrath. And so they got all their stuff in wagons and
Go down to McGrath, what for?
to settle McGrath.
Oh, to move there.
Moved from Beezer to McGrath.
And that's when his brother died.
And his kid hit him in the head with a rock, and he died. And I guess his mother never did get over it. But
How much older was he?
I don't know how much older he was, but he was the first child, and Dad was like about the 8th or something like that. There were
11 children, weren't there?
I think so. I've got that somewhere. I could probably find that for you. Anyway, Dad sold. He made a lot of his living just being a salesman. He went to normal school. Normal school, I think, was a French word. A normal school meant it was a teacher's college.
When we have our family reunion down at Albion, used to be a normal school.
Yeah.
Yeah, it used to be a normal school. So that's teacher's college, and Dad went to that and taught school and was a traveling salesman. And
You went with him when he taught school sometimes, didn't you?
well, he taught school in a little town called Bingville, which is by Medicine Hat, which is in eastern Alberta.
Bingville?
Bingville, Bingville. It's way out in the prairie. And your mother and I went to Medicine Hat. We tried to find someone that knew where Bingville was.
This was about 3 or 4 years ago.
Oh, it was about 10 or 15 years ago, which is recent. And he said nobody knew, had never even heard of Bingville. So they said, why don't you go to the library? Because this guy that runs the library will be able to find out about all that stuff. So he got into, he'd never heard of Bingville. He got into his records, and he said Bingville, and he showed us on the map where Bingville was, which is up north of Medicine Hat. I don't know how many miles it was, because travel in those days was a lot slower. So, but he was working there, and I went and stayed with him, lived in the little teacherage while he taught school in Bingville. We had 12 grades in one room. All the grades were in one room.
So just you and your dad?
What?
It was just you and your dad?
Well, just Dad was teaching,
Yeah, and your dad just went with him.
I just went with him.
How old were you?
What?
How old were you?
10. I was 10 years old, or 9 or 10. And it was really interesting to be in this room, even though in Cardston we had sometimes 2 grades in one. We had 2nd and 3rd grade in one room. But here we had all the way 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right up to grade 12.
Seems like that'd be hard to be the teacher, to stay on top of all the subjects for all those different grades.
Yeah, it would be. And I learned an awful lot there. Dad told Mom I was the smartest kid he had in that whole school. I learned a lot there because I would hear what all the high school kids were getting too. And we had outdoor toilets around back, no running water, had a pump. The teachers had a pump. And I invented a mouse trap. This was a tin can with a nail in the bottom that poked up through. And on the nail I'd put a little piece of cheese and I'd put that under the floor in our teacherage. And every morning the mouse trap would have mouse droppings in it, but the cheese had always been gone. But I should have realized that a mouse can jump out of the tin can. I just thought it would fall in the tin can. I'd reach out and get the cheese and fall in the tin can, and I'd have them, but I never caught it. I just got a lot of mouse trap. Anyway, it was fun doing that. And at night, it was during I guess it was the first part of the First World War, before Dad had joined up. Because every night we would run through the field about 1.5 miles to the old German's place.
Really?
The old German was a farmer, and he had a shortwave radio. And we'd go there running as fast as we could because of all the mosquitoes. We'd get to his place and listen to the shortwave radio. And of course, the news was always days late. It wasn't like
So the shortwave radio kept you up to date on the war.
I kept up to date on the war, and Dad was really quite disgusted because this German guy was always so enthralled when the Germans would be winning something. He was always pleased that the Germans were winning the war. Of course, they didn't win the war. But living out there in that little town with all these grades in one room was really quite interesting.
How long did you do that?
Not very long, about 3 months, I think. Yeah.
So, how did your dad meet your mother?
They were at a party, and Dad
I mean, do
played.
you want stuff like that too?
Yeah, I want. Yeah.
They were having a party, and Dad played the trombone, and Mother played the trombone, and Mother was playing her trombone. Dad didn't have his. It was a dance. The Cahoons used to go all over to play for dances because their whole family was musical. They all had one or two instruments, and his mother was playing the trombone. Dad started boo, 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 and he'd be pantomiming playing a trombone.
Okay.
So Dad said he was standing across the room from where Mother was playing the trombone, and he was pantomiming. So afterwards they started talking, of course, and then they started going together. They finally got married. And I don't remember how many months it was before the temple was finished. But the temple in Carson was going to be finished then. And they were going to get married in the temple, but they got married before the temple was there. But Mother wouldn't let him be intimate with her until they were sealed in the temple. I guess that was probably upsetting for Dad. Anyway, Mother was like that. So they didn't consummate the marriage, as you might call it, until after the temple was built. They got married, and Dad got a job teaching school out in Beezer. Now, if you go by the road from Levitt to Beezer, it's probably 10 or 12 or 15 miles, maybe even more than that. But if you walk up on the top of Coyote Hill, which is where Grandpa and Grandma Cahoon's house was on the bottom of Coyote Hill, you walk up on top of that, you look to the southwest, and you can see far away in the canyons where Beezer was. And Dad used to walk that over every morning and back every night. They lived in Grandpa and Grandma. He'd
How
walk
many
that
miles was that?
about 4. You didn't. Wasn't 4. It's 14 or 15 miles around, but straight through it was about 5.
But that's how come Lars hikes to the top of that hill every day.
Maybe so. But Dad did that. And then Dad caught smallpox. He was the only person I ever remember knowing specifically, personally, who had ever had smallpox. Of course, he didn't have it when I was born, but this was long before I was born. He had smallpox and didn't know what to do with him, so he couldn't teach, so he dropped out of teaching, and he went back to McGrath, where his older sisters, now Maybelle was older, but I don't think.
This is after he was married?
What?
This is after he was married?
Yeah. His older sisters took care of him, Maybelle and Mary. And for some reason they didn't get smallpox. You know, sometimes people had a very light dose and they would immunize them just like the smallpox vaccination. So he had smallpox and he dropped out of school then, I don't know. Dad was about the most honest man I ever knew. He taught me fair play, very specifically. He was kind, he was good, he was honest, and he, above all, was fair. I remember one time, I've told you this story, but I'll tell you again. One time, I had a bet with Lawrence. Of course, Lawrence was almost 3 years older than I was, and so I always felt quite a bit of competition from him. I had a bet with Lawrence, and I won. And I told Dad, I said, you know, we bet and I won. And he looked at me and he wasn't, I thought he'd be really happy. You beat Lawrence, I don't know. He said, you knew what you were betting on, you knew you were right. I said, yeah. He said, you knew it was a sure thing. And I said, yeah. He said, you don't bet on a sure thing. That's not fair. I thought, so? I always did think that that's the best way to bet when it's a sure thing. But still, even though I kind of disagreed privately that you don't ever bet on a sure thing, it seemed like you always bet on a sure thing. But anyway, that taught me about fairness and about fair play. And you know, I think that still stuck with me, because over here with these people that have been parking on our property, we have a chance of making a lot of money off that, like $500 a day for 5 months or something like that. But I got over there the other day and I looked at that. Now, you know, they didn't do that much harm. They didn't do that much harm. I really can't try to get, you know, something just because I can. That's just not fair. And I thought of Dad then, you know, you don't bet on a sure thing and you treat each other fairly. So that was a tremendous lesson. I've always felt like that. And I think I've always been about as fair as anybody I've ever known. These are things I wrote a long time ago and don't even remember why. He always talked nice about Mother. Always talked so nice about Mother. What a sweet, wonderful person he was. How lucky he was that she married him. And she, on the other hand, was almost always talked kind of nastily about him and about the heads. And since then, I've learned that the heads in England were ministers to the king. Now, this goes back a good many years, but they were ministers to the king. And so they weren't a nothing race of people. They weren't a nothing bunch of people. But Mother treated
Ministers? What does you mean minister? What do you mean they were ministers to the king?
There's a certain name that there's a title. The kings had their own private bishops and things like that. They had their own private religious leaders.
And did those religious leaders take care of the king only, or did they take care of other people
They
too?
took care of the king and his family only. You know, when they threw off the Roman yoke in England and got the Church of England, a lot of the kings still kept Catholic fathers, and they kept them in the hidey hole. That's what they called the hidey hole. They kept them in the hidey hole. This means they were out of sight, and they weren't supposed to be known about. So the heads were actually, whatever that royal title is, to the king. So they were significant people.
Were they Catholic?
What?
Were they Catholic?
Probably. I'm sure
How
there
do
were
you spell
churches.
hidey hole?
What?
Hidey hole.
Well, Hidey, not Heidi like in Heidi. Heidi Dirty.
Yeah.
Heidi Ho. That was,
Like hide and seek.
you know,
Just
when
to
I was
keep
a
them
kid.
secret?
What?
To keep them secret and private?
Yeah, keep them secret and private. That was after the king had disavowed the Catholic Church and had started his own church. And when I was a kid, if you hid someplace, it was your special little place where you hung out. It was your hidey hole. Is that an expression you've heard?
I've heard it, but I didn't know where it came from.
Well, that's what it was. Anyway. I remember so well when he got hurt. He couldn't reach the top of the roof, and he was bending underneath the roof, underneath the eaves. And we had a big workbench made out of heavy material. And he was up painting, and couldn't reach it, so he put his ladder on top of this workbench. If he had put the workbench long ways, it might have helped, but he put it sideways. So he climbed up the ladder with his paint can and got to the top, and the workbench turned over, and the ladder, of course, slipped and fell, and you could see paint out of the paint bucket that splashed down the side of the house, right from the top of the eaves. It splashed down the side of the house. And you know, the last time I went out there and looked, which has been quite a head on the lawn. And what was the name of the neighbor?
Cooks.
Cook. What was her first name?
Mom.
Maud Cook looked out and thought he was laying on the lawn, and he was probably resting because she'd seen him up there painting. She looked out half hour later or so, and he was still there, so she went over. And of course, he was unconscious, and he'd been laying on his back, and his face was really sunburned because the sun had been beating down on me for 3 or 4 hours before she saw him, maybe. And I was at Grand Rounds. I was sitting in the amphitheater in the county hospital.
He was in medical school.
Yeah, I was in medical school there. I was a sophomore. And I was sitting up on the back row taking notes of this because we always were tested on Grand Round. And someone came in and said, "Your dad's in the emergency room." And Mother had been driving a cab, and somebody called her and said, "Your husband's in the emergency room." And so I went down, and there he was. I was devastated. His face has gone really red and swollen by then from the sunburn. And they wanted to know who the doctor was. Of course, we didn't have a doctor, but I had been working with a neurologist who was expert in head injuries. His name was Peter Lindstrom. Do you know who he was? Peter Lindstrom was married to Ingrid Bergman.
You
know who she is?
Yeah. He's Swedish, and so is she.
She's a Swedish girl, and he was married to her. Of course, by then she'd divorced him and gone to that guy that used to place at Shakespeare. What was his name? Anyway. So they said, "Who's the doctor?" And so I thought, well, I've been doing surgery with Peter Lindstrom, and he's a neurologist, he's a head surgeon. So I said, "Peter Lindstrom." And they asked Peter Lindstrom, they'd never heard of Dad, of course. And they told me that. I said, "Well, I'm sure if he knows this is my father." And he said, "Well, if that's Ed's father, sure, I'll take him as a patient." So he took care of your dad, and I helped him operate on Dad's head twice. Open up his skull. We didn't have MRIs or CT scans or anything like that then. If you wanted to see what was in the skull, you could take a regular x-ray and you could see fractures, but you couldn't always see bleeding and stuff like that. So if you want to know what was going on inside the skull, you opened it up. So I helped him on 2 surgeries, and then he stayed there. I'd go there at night. I was on that service. He was in my service. He's among the patients that I was assigned to take care of. So when that study, it was right at final time, just before finals. And it was right at final time, so I studied him in that room. And I talked to him. We brought a big fan in that was your dad's. Remember that, honey, that green fan?
He was upstairs for a long time. I don't know where it is now.
I think it quit working. I think I finally threw it away. I didn't tell you that, Beautiful big old fan of that. Didn't have any air conditioning, and so it was so hot in that room that you'd open the window and put this big fan at his feet. He was always running a temperature because that was sort of the nature of this kind of head injury. There was no better temperature. And then we got a summer internship in Provo.
The mental hospital.
No, that was my junior year, because the first year we went to Blackfoot, because Blackfoot was easier to get into, and they wouldn't take you if you weren't. They would take you in Blackfoot if you were a sophomore. So we went, and then it was between my junior and senior year that Dad got hurt. Yeah, I wasn't taking care of patients in my sophomore year, so it was a junior. And then we moved down to Provo to take that summer internship with the mental hospital in Provo. We got down there, and just as we got the kids ready for bed, they called from the hospital and said my dad had just died. They'd been there maybe 2 or 3 hours earlier. So I jumped in the car and went back up, and there was no reason to do it. taken out of the room, and it was in the morgue. And I remember feeling so blue and so morose that I wouldn't see Dad anymore. You know. That was kind of a hard time.
Paul said that that was the only time he ever saw you cry.
Well, maybe. Yeah. Anyway, that's about all I can tell you. He was a good, honest man. Mother used to say when he was gone off in the Air Force, she used to say, I can always trust your dad. Always do the right thing. I remember one night, it was Christmas Eve, and Dad, I think he was living in Regina then. We went to Regina for 3 months and stayed with him, and that's where I first learned how to sail on the sailboat with Dad in Regina.
He was there training
He was there training people. He was training
pilots.
pilots. He was in the Second World War. He was First World War. He flew these little planes of no much bigger than kites. Second World War, he flew an Arvo Anson. That was a training point, and we used to go to. Lawrence and I, we never went at the same time because he couldn't take us both at once. But I'd go to McLeod. He'd take us up in the airplane. We'd put on a parachute that hung clear down to our knees and back. It's a good thing we never had to jump out. And we'd climb in and fasten ourselves down in these metal seats. And we flew all over southern Alberta. We flew over Cardston, Leavitt, Waterton Lakes, all around those places. It was fun. And the court-martialed the guy there because when his plane came back took off from McLeod, he flew up to Mountain View, he landed in a field, saw his girlfriend, and took off, went back to McLeod, and they noticed he had grass in his landing gear. So they knew that between the time he left McLeod and came back to McLeod, he had been on the ground. And so I remember he got court-martialed. I don't know what happened. But Dad didn't do that. He didn't land anywhere. It was fun to fly. That's all.
His dad really liked sweets.
What?
When you were going to university, you'd stop by and see us sometimes, because we lived in Stadium Village there on campus.
Oh, he worked in his declining years. He worked as an aide, an orderly in the Veterans Administration Hospital at Fort Douglas. He stopped by and talked to Sonja.
And if I had a chocolate cake, he would put jam on it and then eat it.
I guess there's other things to think about. He was a good man. He was an honest man. I always knew that Dad, whatever, would do the right thing. And you know what? Sonja's dad was exactly the same way. They weren't the same kind of people necessarily. But I never heard either of them say a bad word, a vulgar word.
Not only bad words, but your dad was very strict about English. And it used to really irritate him if somebody used incorrect English. Remember that?
Yeah.
He was quite educated, and he really liked things to be just the way they were.
Well, he was smart. He was very intelligent. I think it was one of his downfalls. He was so intelligent, he kept looking for the magic formula that would make him $1 million, and he never did make much money. Sometimes we were hungry. That was Mother's biggest complaint. Besides, she didn't like the heads, and that always has bothered me.
Jenny, should I cut it off?
doing at that time, and
We used to drive around southern Alberta in an old Ford car, and on the way to Levitt, there was a valley with a beautiful spring on one side of the road and a pond off the other side of the road. Those are still there. The other side of the pond was a big oil derrick, and they were drilling for an oil well. Dad had some kind of business relationship with the guy that owned that farm. So we used to go in there and out 2 or 3 times. And I remember one time, I was sitting in the front of the car by Dad, and Lawrence was behind. He wanted to sit in front. So Dad said, hop in the back.
to you.
To me. So I got up, of course we didn't have seatbelts, turned around, and I put my hand on the handle of the door to crawl over into the back seat. The door went open, and I was hanging onto the handle. It threw me out of the car onto the ground. Of course, it was just 2 little tire tracks with grass on both sides. I rolled off into that grass, didn't hurt me a bit. Of course, he wasn't probably traveling very fast. And I got up and ran. By the time he stopped, I was trying to catch up. That was one time. I probably shouldn't tell you the next time. We'd been there quite a while on the way out from that place towards the road. We had to stop and go to the bathroom. And so there was Dad and Lawrence and I lined up. I'm not going to tell you that.
It's okay.
Well, we were standing there going to the bathroom, and Dad looked at me, and he was just amazed at how long a stream I could make. He said, well, you can do that clear across the road. He said, I used to be able to do that. I can't now. You know, an old man, as they get older, they have problems with it.
I don't think you need to tell new kids now about that.
I thought that was funny. I've never forgotten that. 2 things on the same road. Every time I go by there, I think of that. Of course, now they got a gravel road going in there. Then it was just 2 tire tracks in the grass. That's where all the roads were then, practically. And I remember rolling, the door swung open, and I rolled out. He must have been going around a corner or something. I don't know. I rolled out in the grass, and he thought he'd killed me, and he stopped. Started coming back, and I got up and ran toward him. Dad was kidding me about how big, fast, how strong a stream I could make. Yeah, you don't need to tell the kids that. Look at her blush.
Well, you probably just had a lot to drink and a lot of force.
Also, your mother, it was during the Depression, and a lot of men didn't have jobs, and they would hop onto the rail cars and just ride across the country and get off some places, and your mother would always feed them. They'd come up there to see if she'd give them any food, and she always had them sit down at the table and she fed them.
So we ate with a lot of bums, that's what we call them. This is during the Depression. They were riding the rails. You know, you heard riding the rails. They were riding the rails, and the train would pull into the spur there by the grain elevators. And these guys would get off and then lay in the... That's not about Dad, that's about me.
Well, that's about your mother and Dad.
The hobos, the bums, used to know which people in town would feed you because they would mark the door, they'd mark the gate, or they'd mark the fence somehow. And so they would get off the train and they would walk through the town. Of course, Rentham was just a little tiny town. They'd walk through the town and they'd always knock on Mama's door. And she'd feed them. And when Dad was teaching school at Rentham, he'd be a little late. He'd take off out the door and head for the school, and the clothesline was just high enough to catch him in the throat. And 2 times he hit that clothesline. And really, you know, you can damage yourself a lot by breaking your hyoid bone in your disgust with him for doing that, especially twice. I'd walk downtown with Dad. Before the Second World War, we were living in Boston, and I would walk with Dad. I'd hold his hand, and I would swing along, taking steps as long as his steps were. And they'd stop and talk about the war that was coming, And always so awesome, sort of ominous. It was ominous to hear about the war coming. We knew it was a long ways away, but then our boys started going to war. Dad didn't get into the Air Force until maybe the last 3 years of the World War II. Boys all joined up and went to war, and then they started coming. Well, they didn't start coming back because they didn't bring the bodies back. They didn't bring the bodies back. We started hearing tales about this person had been killed and that person had been killed. Sometimes it would be brothers that would be killed. That was kind of ominous, it was a long ways away. I heard King George talk on the radio. He was a stuttering king. He would kind of stammer a little bit, but he practiced his speeches a lot so that he didn't stutter
King George.
too much. I'd hear the men talking about the coming war. And when we went to war against the Japanese too, there were a lot of Japanese people in Canada, and you'd hear stories about don't pick up any toy or anything you find on the side of the road because it could be a Japanese trick. I never saw it happen. We used to run up and down and roam up and down the St. Mary's River when we were little kids. And they had, in Lethbridge, they had a huge German prison camp.
Really?
And these prisoners would escape, but the reason they'd escape is because they wanted to stay in Canada. And I know that one time we found a little hovel that was obviously occupied, and we somehow knew that that was where some German prisoners were staying. We were really scared because we thought, they might want to hurt us. It's got nothing to do with that, except that he was in the Air Force himself by then.
Jenny, Anna just tried to call you.
Had thousands and thousands of German prisoners, and one guy would go with a bunch of them, and they'd take them out into the farm country. All the Canadian young men were at war, and so they didn't have enough workers, and so these Germans would go out as prisoners and do farm work. They'd have one guard with a rifle guarding all these prisoners, and there never was anybody that got hurt or anything like that. No civilians ever got harmed by any German prisoners. At the end of the war, a lot of people, Germans just stayed there. They were escaping. I don't know whatever happened to them legally. I don't know. One night, Dad had come home. It was Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve, and Dad hadn't come home, but he had called Mother. I think we actually had a phone by then. He called Mother and told her he was going to try to get home for Christmas, and so they took the train to Lethbridge, and they didn't have road plows that went between the towns and cleaned out the snow, and it was blowing blizzard and deep snow, and we didn't hear from Dad, except that we had heard that he was going to come and he was going to try to come home. What they did is they came into Lethbridge and they found a bus driver who driving to Cardston, but they had to get snow shovels. They had to bring snow shovels so that they could shovel through the snowbanks on the road between Lethbridge and Cardston. And so they'd drive the bus until they got to a place where the snowbank was covered in the road. All these guys would get out and shovel like crazy. They had about 20 or 30 men with snow shovels, and so they'd shovel the road, go to the next snowbank and shovel again, and they finally got home, and I remember waking up quite late at night and you hear Dad's voice downstairs. That's Christmas Eve. And in, maybe it was Brandon, Manitoba. He was in Brandon, Manitoba then. And he said just before he left, the sports gym on the base had a lot of equipment they wanted to give away. So they had like boxing gloves. That's the main thing I remember, is the boxing gloves. And smaller balls, basketballs. And Dad brought a bunch of that stuff home. It was all used, of course, and well used. I remember how fun that was to have that. I used to box with Dad.
We had boxing gloves. Were those the ones we had?
I think so.
Wow.
Maybe not.
When we were little?
Oh, probably not. What else, honey?
Oh, I'm thinking.
What?
I'm thinking about it.
You know, you lived there in Stadium Village, right on that lower house. You used to come there.
Yeah, you can visit us once in a while.
I remember after he died. Well, he wasn't dead yet. Right at the end of my junior year. I knew by then that you'd never live. Never come out of it. And I remember one time I got some kind of an award, I don't know what it was. And I came into that little apartment and I put my arms around it and I said, Dad'll never know now about this honor that I've been given. I can't remember what it was. Remember that?
Yeah.
I put my arms around you and cried. You'll never know. Of course you did know.
Yeah.
Maybe you did.
Yeah. Well, he's still out there. He's still hanging around, and that's sure nice to know that. You know that? That's enough stuff, and you'll never remember 1/10 of it.